just want to welcome everybody to the Art Center. My name is Kinsey Robb. I'm the executive director here, and I just want to thank you all for coming here to the kickoff of our artist series for the season. So each season, with all of our exhibiting artists, we are really fortunate to be able to have an artist talk series go on here at the Art Center, and we're really thrilled that, Zach, you're going to be kind of christening it, I guess. You're our first artist of the season for the talk series, and you'll be in conversation with our director of exhibitions, Christina Burrell. I would like to say that on behalf of all of us, we're really grateful and thankful that we get to have this exhibition here at the Art Center. This is it's a debut of new work from you that's taken about 3 years in the making. So we get to be the first to exhibit, and it's always fun to be the first to exhibit new work by an artist. With an extraordinary fusion of steel, concrete, terrazzo, Zach has created a captivating body of work that defies convention and transforms these somewhat industrial-seeming materials into stunning, evocative forms that challenge our perceptions and celebrate the beauty of unconventional mediums. So we're really thrilled to see this progression in your work. And I just want to say a special thanks to our exhibitions department, Christina, our director of exhibitions, and Cassie, who's in the back, who's also manning this video recording, for organizing this show and also this discussion that we're going to have this evening. And obviously, thank you to Zach for allowing us to be your first show of these pieces, and for your generosity in coming out tonight to discuss your practice with all of us. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Christina and Zach. Thank you.
Sitting in the front row.
Thank you.
And thank you guys all for coming. It really means a lot when we have these artist talks to get the people that care to come, so thank you. And of course, Zach, thank you. Zach is very near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons, but I'm so excited about your show and so grateful that you're here.
Thank you. Is this on?
Mm-hmm. It is. So before we dive into the work, I know most of these people know you, but I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your childhood and your rediscovery of art.
Okay. So it's kind of interesting, you know, every little kid likes to make art. A kid back there making art right now. But when I was a youngin', about Sage's age, I just loved to draw nonstop. And I was a lefty. So I would draw and draw and draw. My mom said that I would draw with my left hand until I got tired, and then I'd start drawing with my right hand. So I would flip-flop back and forth all the time, and that was kind of my thing. And then in kindergarten, I was writing left-handed, and back in the early 80s, they were still making kids that were writing left-handed switch to write right-handed. So I was taught to write right-handed. So now here I am, I do most things with my left hand, except for I write with my right hand, and I use a fork with my right hand. But every other thing I do is with my left hand. But it kind of helps out a lot now that I'm the way I work now, because I feel very comfortable with both hands, and you know, I feel like I can draw with both hands somewhat decently, or at least to convey the gesture that I'm looking for. So I like to be able to flip-flop back and forth. So when I was young, like, I'm a very competitive person, and I had an older cousin who was like a bigger brother to me. He was like 4 years older than me, and he was an artist. So I was 8, he was 12, and he was already in galleries downtown. So we lived in a little suburb outside of Pittsburgh, and his paintings were in the window of this gallery and stuff. And I had this. My parents, when I was a kid, were in the Air Force. So like my favorite thing to draw was F-16s. So I was always drawing F-16s. So it was like I knew I had my pocket F-16 that I could bust out at any moment and we could compete. And so I challenged Haven to a drawing contest one day. I was like, and Aunt Pat will be the judge, his mom. And she's like, I'm not getting involved in this. So we drew, and I drew my pocket F-16. It was like a profile, very 2D, and it has the sunshine and stuff. And Haven draws this F-16 busting out of the paper, and there's guys parachuting out of it. And just blew me out of the water. And I was like, well, I'm done. I can't be the best in the family. And I just stopped. So I quit wanting to make art the way that I did when I was younger. And I remember my last art class was in 6th grade, and I remember all the projects, but I don't remember any of the projects I did in my advanced psychology class in 12th grade. It stuck with me, and it took about 20 years for it to work itself back out. And meandering through and trying to find other things to do. The first time I went to college, I thought I was going to be a gym teacher, pretty athletic, and I was like, well, I could do that, and a good excuse to play soccer and coach. Well, that didn't go so well. I failed my walking class, so it's hard to walk at 6 in the morning when you're a first-year student. After that, I ended up in the Air Force and got into the air traffic control program and was doing really well. And then, but nothing ever really stuck. It was like I was always trying to do something that someone else wanted me to do. So after the Air Force, I ended up going back to college. I was a little more prepared at the time, and I went to play soccer. Basically, it was my whole reason for going was to play college soccer. I was going to get a math degree this time, and then go back to the Air Force and fly those F-16s I like to draw. So after soccer practice one night, one of my teammates was a graphic design student. He had a ceramics class he was doing with his girlfriend. So they invited me over because I was new to town, didn't really have any friends. And we walked into that ceramic studio, and I started making stuff out of that clay. And it was just like this aha moment, Finally at 24, it was like, this is where I belong. And I just changed everything. I dropped my major, got the paperwork to be an art student, didn't talk to anybody or ask about it. I filled out the paperwork, brought it to the art professor, said, I'm going to be an art student now. And he looked at me and said, oh, are you? And it was such a small school, they didn't have any other art students in that class. So they just were like, well, we need the numbers. So they didn't make me do a portfolio or anything. And I just ran with it. So that was kind of my meandering journey back into this thing. And I've just been diving a bit further into it since.
Well, I think we're all grateful that you found your way back in the ceramic studio. And for those of us sculptors and ceramicists in the building, I can relate to that urge to create with clay. So very exciting. But for those of you that don't know Zach's whole life story, this is not his first rodeo at the Art Center. So I'm hoping you can share with us just a little bit about how the many roles you've had here have shaped your artistic journey, but also your journey just through the art community of Sarasota.
Certainly. So Amanda and I moved back here after I graduated in 2009, and we lived out in Anna Maria with Amanda's parents for a couple weeks, and it was right at the end of the recession, and not a great time to be coming out of school as far as job prospects and stuff. So there wasn't a whole lot happening, I picked up a part-time job framing at Michael's, and then I started going into the art center, so I went to the Manatee Art Center, and I walked in here, and there was an exhibition of Chris Lundy's paintings. So Chris Lundy is a local guy, he's like a big wave surfer, and he had these huge paintings of these waves, and they were almost like graffiti-like. And I think there was 3 in each of the front rooms. They were giant, and they just floored me. And I literally just sat on the floor and stared at those paintings for a couple hours, and just meandered through the art center and just walked into the volunteer coordinator's office and was like, I need to be involved here, and started helping out. And they let me help out with an exhibition. And it just so happened that Tim Yeager, who was your position at the time, was going to get a preparator position over at Greenland College. So he was walking out as I was just coming in with no experience. I had only ever hung my own thesis show, and then this one jury show. I hoped to hang the show back here. It was the only experience I had, and the director at the time, Fan, I literally begged her for a job, and she was like, "You don't have any experience." I was like, "I know, but I will work my butt off. Just give me a chance." And she did. She let me have a chance, and I just ran with it. This place has been like a second home to Amanda and I for a long time. It just opened up a ton of doors and a ton of opportunities, and we've just met so many wonderful people in town. And so it's just it's a really special place, and it's really surreal to, after all this time, to have my first solo show here. It's just been incredible. Amanda and I used to, when we first got here, what's amazing about this town is like, as it's growing, and the art scene kind of has its ebbs and flows, but there's always something that needs done and added to, and if you have the energy, it doesn't. When we got here, it was just like, it didn't matter that we didn't have any experience. We had energy, we had ideas, and everyone was just like, sweet, go do it, So we started throwing these art parties, and we had our first one here, and we would do these live art competitions, basically, and we'd have musicians. For this one, it was DJs. It was like, there used to be this vinyl music festival in town. It was kind of like a bunch of DJs from all over the world that would come. And so we had this DJ crew from Atlanta that was in here. And we had Chris Lundy painting, and Javier Rodriguez, who you all probably know, and then Nick Siratic, who was a pretty amazing artist that moved away a few years ago. And they made art while these guys played their music, and we started throwing those parties all over town. And that's how we met everybody. We just got connected with this wonderful town, and so the Art Center is my place. So after I left as the exhibitions coordinator, I had one commission lined up, and I was like, sweet, I'm on my own. So I did that commission, and then I was quickly out of money. So we started coming up with other things, and the Art Center needed a janitor. So I came back to be the janitor, and I cleaned the place for a couple of years. So I would come in here at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had this surround sound system, and I'd crank up the music.
It's still there.
It is?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Trying to bring it back.
What was your office? We had this.
It still has the motherboard.
Nice.
Yes. It's a broom closet turned office. Yeah.
So I'd put on Sam Cooke's greatest hits, and I would just dance my butt off and clean the whole place. And, it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I've done pretty much everything except the finances and run the place. So it's been a lot of fun, and we still volunteer. And now my installation company, which I started about 8 years ago ish. Now we've partnered with the Art Center, and we install all of these art shows now. So it's really nice. It's all come full circle, and still have such an important part of our life. And this Art Center is a jumping off point. It was a huge jumping off point for me, and launching all the things we've done since 2009. And it's just awesome to see it constantly grow. It's like every few years, it's like little by little, it just keeps moving, and you guys are doing a great job. Happy to be a part of it.
Well, we're lucky that you are exhibiting here, and I think we'd be grateful if we had a janitor as dedicated as it sounds like you were.
We're all the janitors.
We're all janitors. But so, you mentioned that ceramics was your sort of first foray into sculpture. Do you think there's any sort of lingering ceramic habits that might be tinkering around in there that informs your work?
Yes, and I didn't realize it for a long time. So I didn't realize it until after I left the Art Center, I ended up getting a job as the shop tech at New College. So it was really sweet work, and there was almost like I was getting paid to to learn. I felt like it was almost like a master's program in a way, because I was working so closely with all the professors in the different departments. And Johnny Hartzog was in there one day after I had been there for about a year and a half, and I was plugging away on some ridiculous project that I came up with. And she goes, you approach your work like a ceramic artist. She's like, you just dive right in. And it's really expensive when you're working with stainless steel and all these other things if you don't have a plan. So you can burn through things really quickly. But what's happened is with ceramics, like that first time I touched the ceramics in college, and really the first time I centered something on the wheel, it was like shivers went through me, and it was almost like I touched the hand of God. And I was like, well, I've got to get back to that all the time. You know, that was the thing that hooked me. And so now, like whatever material it is, like when I graduated, we ended up here, or I was painting under Devin Saul's house out on Anna Maria, because I didn't have access to sculpture equipment or any kind of ceramic stuff. So I just was like, well, I'll spend the couple $100 I had in my pocket on painting supplies, and I started painting. So I painted for a little bit. I'm not an amazing painter. Still very expressionist and intuitive. And then things started layering. And then I started melting all the candles in our house. And I started encaustic painting by accident, and then learned what encaustic painting was. And like everything like automatically started going back into sculpture. And it's always just been start working the material and then see what it tells me to do. And I still do it with the steel and the cement. And it's what drives me in the studio, really, more than any conceptual thing or any kind of theme or whatever. It's really just about seeing where the material takes me.
Well, that is a perfect segue into my next question, because we've talked a lot, and it's really struck me that your dedication is to the process, not the final outcome. And so I couldn't help but think about my grad school days and reading Richard Sennett and his declaration that the craftsman represents the special human condition of being engaged. And I was just wondering, if you could share a little bit about how this engagement with the materials really is what drives you and is what you're all seeing today.
Yeah. Let me check that. I had written some stuff down just to make sure. If you know me at all, you know that I've had some head injuries. So you have to remind myself sometimes. So basically, it's like, probably answered most of that in that last answer, it's back to the clay. It's just back to the basic raw materials, seeing where they can lead to. What ends up happening, I think maybe this came from ceramics as well, because I really liked being a coil builder. So I'd make like lots of coils, like long snakes, and then I would build them up. So I like to make a lot of parts to a bigger thing. And my buddy Mark and I talk about that a lot. It's like, all right, I can make one little nice object, but is that art? But if I have 1,000 of them, then you can't argue with it, So that's basically where I go. I make a ton of things, a ton of parts to then add to something else. A lot of times I like making the thing that makes the thing. So with like these cement pieces, it was more about the engineering and the figuring out of how I was going to get some sort of result close to what I was kind of thinking. And then just diving in and seeing where it takes me.
I've always been struck by how intense you are at looking at materials and how they're put together, and it's wonderful to see. It's so inspiring. But do you think this sort of like experimental engagement with the materials keeps you playful and keeps you sort of lighthearted in the studio?
100%. There's really, I've kind of set up a system that takes away the pressure, I set up my studio so that I'm working on a few pieces at a time in various phases. And then it's almost like with this, it was a little bit of a Russian roulette in a way, because each phase of the process, I knew the general idea of what I wanted to do, like with the 3 tripod pieces. Like I knew I wanted the tripod. After my friend Thomas, my studio neighbor, came by, he needed a sculpture stand kind of modified. And I had these forms already sitting in my studio made out of ram board. And he brought that in and set it on top. And I was like, ha, that's it. I need this thing to be 8 feet tall. Now it makes sense. So I made the tripods. And then from there, it's like, all right, now how am I going to cast the cement into this thing? But with the kind of quarterly metal pieces that are coming out of it, I've been making those for about 8 years now. And I've been trying to jam things inside of them the entire time. Other objects, glass, resin, all kinds of stuff. I felt like something needed to be coming out or being stuck in, and then the cement just ended up being the perfect medium to be able to kind of capture the feeling that I was going for. Yeah, it's all about play. It's all about coming up with ways of getting out of my own way, so that whatever creative thing is in the area can start working its magic.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about those materials. Steel, cement, not ceramic at all. Do you think that your appreciation of like brutalist architecture plays into your love for those materials right now?
I think so. Like I started getting really into brutalist architecture and sculpture probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've just been like image dumping constantly. I even got myself an adult coloring book of famous brutalist buildings around the world. But you know, the work, I think it's inspired by brutalism, and honestly, like a few of the pieces that I had intended on making were, I think, a little more brutalist in nature, like a little more traditional brutalism. So there's a lot of repetition, a lot of facets and things. But when I got to making these pieces, it kind of went in a different direction, and I'm happy with it. So
I'm thrilled. I think they're awesome. And the terrazzo.
Yeah.
Just talk about that.
Okay, so as I was saying, like each phase of this building process is a bit of a Russian roulette. Like if any one thing goes wrong, like the whole piece is dunsies. So I like that pressure. I like that game that I get to play in the studio. So after I cast the bases, like the bottom sections of the larger pieces, I knew that I wanted to add terrazzo to it. I like mixing materials, so a lot of times I'll mix resin and steel or wood and steel, and I've been toying with the cement and terrazzo for a couple of years and trying to figure out how to work it. But we love terrazzo, man and I. We've been trying to figure out ways to incorporate it into our own little house. But for me, I feel like with these pieces, the terrazzo was a way of an opportunity to find like the conceptual side of the work. So like I really wanted these pieces to feel like they were just ripped out of the ground, and so they needed to show that something was there before and that there was something inside. So I figured the terrazzo was a good way to do that. When I cast them in these big sandboxes, it ended up being just a nice way to like, I left a layer so that I could add the terrazzo. And so conceptually, I kind of see that terrazzo is like all the little color flakes and this like pure white thing that we're all floating around in. And I kind of see it as all of our BS, you know, in humanity. And like, we're all trying to float around and be this perfect thing or whatever this idea is of how we're supposed to live, and maybe that's not working out so well for us as a species. And so I kind of see it as like we rip that out of the ground, and maybe there's something else in there that we can and work, build off of. That's kind of a concept that I feel works with Terrazzo.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, the material mixing that you're doing is just so exciting. But addition to the brutalist inspiration, especially the three larger pieces have a very figurative element. And working in abstraction, I'm just wondering, like, how do you sort of figure out how to include the figure in your forms, and what inspiration do you have for that?
It really comes down to gesture and trying to capture the energy of the object, really. I feel like, you know, if you can have something kind of moving in a certain way, or standing and balancing in a certain way, like I really like making things that look like they're not supposed to be standing, and kind of play with just the movement of the whole piece. And I feel like the figure can kind of subtly find its way back into the work. Yeah, I think that's probably about it on that.
Well, so, you know, clearly you are part of this like huge, intense exploration into materials, but you're also extremely dedicated. And so for those in the audience that haven't heard your mishap story, this body of work has been blood, sweat, and tears the whole way. And if you wanted to share with the audience what happened in your studio, please do so. And what did you learn from it?
So I guess I'll preface this by the studio is kind of like my sacred little place, you know, with being a father and a husband and a business owner. It's like I have a lot of people to take care of, I feel like. And so the studio is like my spot where it's just mine, and I can do my thing. So I never really wanted a helper. Actually, Glenn is probably the one person that I would hire in my studio because he's wonderful and we work well together. But like, as the work grows and becomes heavier, I think I'm definitely going to have to figure out ways to incorporate an assistant. I've needed one for quite some time. You know, as these projects have gotten bigger, you know, just the cleanup process of some of my bigger installation pieces, you know, takes weeks. You know, So about 2 days before we were supposed to deliver the sculptures, I had just added on the terrazzo, and I was grinding the terrazzo down. But the way my studio is set up, it's a garage, so it's not the best place to be grinding cement. So it gets pretty gnarly. So I was wheeling there was 4 freestanding pieces. I was wheeling them outside. They were on like cheap 4-wheel dollies. And I was just moving them outside, grinding them, pressure washing them. I was cleaning them up. And the one I was working on was actually the first piece that I sculpted for this show. And it ended up being extremely heavy because the material I was casting the bottom section with was cement mixed with foam. So it's called aircrete, which Danielle, who's sitting back there, had turned me on to a couple of years ago because they were researching about how to build energy efficient houses with aircrete and stuff, and turned me on to it. And so I can make these pieces look, I mean, they look like they're heavy, but they're a little bit lighter because there's a little foam in there. Well, when I cast the first one, I had carved all these facets into the sandbox that I built, and it was the first one I did, so it was much more along the brutalist lines, like a lot of facets, a lot of repeating shapes and stuff. But when I poured the first set of cement, I mixed my foam, and it's like a little science experiment. But I decided I didn't have to measure anything because I was like, oh, I've done this before. I know what it looks like. So I went ahead and did it. Thought I had a perfect foam pour and poured the cement into the mold and started bubbling up a little bit, which it's supposed to. And I was like, sweet, we're done. Turned around, started cleaning up, and came back into the studio, and it had just like started sinking. So like I had poured the cement with the foam, which is just a bunch of air bubbles, into sand, which wasn't sealed with anything. So all those air bubbles, I think, just had somewhere else to go. So it just sank. So I just started dumping 90-pound bags of cement in there to save it. So the piece ended up being probably 500 or 600 pounds. So I had to get some equipment to get it out of the sandbox. So I got a winch, or not, like a gantry. So I was able to lift it out by myself, and I got it standing up, and it was about 8 feet tall in the end. And so there was a huge cement section on the bottom that ended up being way bigger and way heavier than I intended, and then a tall piece at the top. So it was about 11:30 at night, and I had just got done cleaning this piece up, and I was wheeling it back into the studio, and there's a little lip going into the studio, and it just hit that lip, and it started tipping back on me, and it nicked my ear and my shoulder, right where the like organic metal parts are. And I'm not really sure how it didn't take me down with it. It was a really close call. So I got a few stitches with that, and the piece obviously landed on the floor. You can see a picture of it in there on the drawing wall. It's still laying on the floor. I haven't stood it up yet. But there's only a couple cracks, so I think I'll be able to fix it. Like just the top section has a little damage, but the bottom section that has like the 500 pounds of cement in it is fine. Yeah, it was a close call. It was very scary, and you know, I'm just a dumb dude who thinks he can do everything on his own. So I think I've learned my lesson. You know, I want to. Making art is dangerous enough with all the chemicals and tools and things that we all have to use. I need to find a way to work a little smarter, have a helper when I need it, and not try and be a little superhero and do everything on my own kind of thing. Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't the best example of your ceramic knowledge. Like ceramicists are very orderly in how they measure things.
Well, part of that probably, like, my ceramics teacher, Paula, she was wonderful, but she was just learning how to mix her own clay or her own glazes herself when I got to school. So, like, I didn't really learn any of that chemical kind of side of things. It was just raw. We recycled the clay. That's how we rolled. So I never really learned that side of it. But, you know, in my own work process, I've found that to combat my ADD, I have to be super OCD about it. So I have lots of lists, lots of notes, like constantly like taping things onto the wall while I'm working so I can stay on track. And really, like as I go through all the larger successful projects I've had, I went really OCD with everything and did measure stuff. I was so excited to make this stuff. Like when Christina approached me to I think they had a cancellation or something in the gallery, and when she approached me and said, no. Just assumed. I was just so excited to make this work, to complete this body of work, really, because I've been dreaming about it for so long. I've been working in a certain direction with the floral pieces for a while now, and they've been really successful. They've been fun to make, and they've helped our family a lot. But I've constantly been trying to find the transition with it, and this opened up that opportunity. So I was just really excited to get started, so that's why I didn't make sure.
Well, we love your excitement, and despite the fourth one falling, I think the show turned out perfectly. Your ear, however, will, recover. So, you've talked a lot about your process and your interest in materials. Something that I think is really important to your work, and you describe it a little bit in your artist statement, is that you describe this exhibition as being an opening. an opening into the creative realm and accepting the risk to explore those pathways. So for any self-doubting artists out there, what advice would you give them, and how important is it, do you think, for artists to take that plunge?
I think you have to. You'll be wholly disappointed and probably not want to make the work if you don't. I think start by listening to Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Way, that Thomas turned me on to. It was a life changer. I think one thing I gathered from that book is that he explained the creative realm in a way that separated me from it. So like from the work. So like for the longest time it's like you're working and you think it's like autobiographical or like these things and you're thinking about all these things while you're making. But really what it boils down to is like there's this creative energy is rolling around everywhere and like it has to find you working, like Picasso said. But like it's not necessarily me, you know, like I don't have to put all this stuff into it. Like I think the things that are unique about me will end up coming out of the work, but I don't feel the urge to like force myself into the work. And a lot of what I try and do, especially with the finishing of the surfaces and stuff, is like take the hand out so it doesn't look like I had anything to do with it, that I did just pull these out of the ground, you know.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about, or you have with me anyway, about your interest in rhythm and song lyrics. But speaking about Rick Rubin, who's had his hand in every genre of music in the past 30 years, how does this sort of speak to your overall philosophy on life and balance? I know in the last few years you've had some changes. So, what do you think this change has had in developing this work?
I think for the longest time, especially after we had kids, I think I started trying to kind of separate all of my different roles in life, So I'm a dad, I'm a father, I'm an artist, and, I'm an art handler, and just separated them all and kind of compartmentalized them. And I was having a really hard time with that, feeling like I wasn't able to move forward and I was feeling stuck. And I think I realized that once you go down this path of artist, you're in it 24/7. There's no getting out, and you have to implement it in all aspects of your life. And I think when I just kind of gave up and just succumbed to that, it's been a lot more successful. I think that's how I feel about the various roles that I have in life, which all like help and feed everything. Like we've built this life on purpose. It's a creative life we've built, but we've made it so that we can do the things that we love to do, and we're very fortunate for it. And like my art handling business informs my studio practice so much because I get to work with new work every day. I get to work with incredible things from 500,000 years ago with Glenn over at the museum. I get to work with new work. We do a lot of mass-produced stuff too, so there's a whole gamut. So I learn a ton about what to do and what not to do with my own work just by touching these objects on a daily basis. And I feel very, very lucky about that. And then with our kids, like we do this fun drawing game after dinner, and we call it the drawing game. But it's basically like a Dada, like a exquisite corpse thing. So we each start out with a piece of paper and we draw something. We have a certain amount of time. Maybe we'll put like a little hourglass thing, and then we rotate and we add, and the kids just love it. We love it, and I learn a ton from it. And it really helps with that intuitiveness in my own studio practice because the kids, they're the best at that. So I can steal a lot from them to help me in the studio. But it helps kind of get you out of your own way and suppress your ego a little bit so that you can make the things that are honest and pure.
That sounds like an awesome show that we could have here. Zach's Family's Exquisite Corpse. So I know that it brings me such joy to hear that this body of work is feeling like a jumping off point to something bigger. And I'm sure that is resonated in the audience as well. So what do you think your future work would look like, and how soon until we can see it?
Well, I think with this body of work, this is obviously the first time I've ever had a solo show. A lot of times when I start a big project, it ends up one small thing turns into a much larger thing, and I like having these like all-encompassing, like immersive installation pieces, basically. So like with this one, I kind of feel like I made 18 pieces. I almost feel like I made an album, you know. Music is a big part of my process. I have a little mantra in the studio, which is like an unrealistic goal, but it's to be music. Like the whole time, I'm like, all right, if I can make my cement feel like the way a song makes you feel, then I probably got something, you know? And that's a lofty goal, it's unattainable, but that's the way that I like to work. So I kind of see this as a one piece, even though there's 18 pieces. So, you know, whatever happens with that is whatever. It'd be nice to see it kind of move to another venue and see how we can make that venue work. So I don't think that I will necessarily make things similar to what I'm making now. I see like the things that worked well to create the forms and the gestures and the textures and the combinations of things. And I feel like there's a lot of energy that came from these pieces, and I think I can transfer that into other forms. When you look at the drawing wall, like there's a lot of inspiration in there, obviously. And the problem I had with some of those drawings, you know, I thought that I would be able to draw these pieces, engineer how I was going to make them, and then create them. Well, I started making forms that were kind of rigid and like followed the drawing exactly, and it just fizzled out. Like it didn't work for me, and like I had to go back to just like diving into the material again. It's just the way I feel comfortable. So I think what I'd like to do is like hone my skills with the terrazzo. Like I feel like there's a lot of room to really build on my finishing with that, and having that combo still with the raw cement and the stainless steel, but in maybe more manageable sizes. Kind of see these as like I have a bad habit of always thinking a little bit too big, and having loftier goals and unrealistic goals. You know, part of Rick Rubin's book, In the Creative Way, he talks about like when you go down this path, you have to have this like unrelenting, like unrealistic push to do the thing that you do. So you're constantly, you know, dropping other things in your life. You know, like I don't always get to go hang out with my friends and stuff because I'm gonna go to the studio and work. You know, so it's just all the decisions that Amanda and I have made to get to this point. You know, most normal people would probably not take those risks. We've helped each other to be comfortable with that, and somewhat calculated. So I kind of see the pieces as maquettes for larger outdoor pieces. Like I have a few outdoor pieces. I really want to kind of start getting into the public art realm and just see if I can make smaller maquettes that maybe can be scaled by a larger facility that can manage the material, engineering behind it, and, you know, making sure it's safe for people and stuff like that. But that's kind of where my head is. It's like I went big, they're a little too big probably, and now I want to scale back down and start kind of honing in and maybe be able to scale it up.
Well, I can't wait to see one in the middle of Main Street. Go big or go home, right? Well, I know that the audience has a lot of questions, but before we finish up, I was just hoping that you could tell us, as a viewer, if there's one element, one concept, one feeling from Agglutinated Moments, what would you want us to feel?
That's a great question. I feel like the response to the show has been really incredible. Everyone's been so kind, and a lot of words, and a lot of people have said things that I didn't realize, which is always wonderful. But I think just the honesty in the work, the risks that we're taking to make it. I think that's where the energy is, and if you can feel that, then I feel it was successful. And, if someone looks at your artwork for more than 2 seconds, I think it's a win. So,
I think people are looking at your work a lot longer than 2 seconds.
All right, well, I think we're ready to open it up for any questions from the audience. So please let us know if you have some questions.
yes, there.
One of the things that I'm really loving about your work is how contradicting energies kind of come together, and the delicate part of the metal parts that you're, I don't know how you do any of this, but how they're formed into this kind of almost lacy feeling. Look like they're supporting, chunks of heavy earth. And I was just wondering, is that contradictory feeling of different energies coming together that don't naturally happen one of your desires to keep doing?
Definitely. Like I love just like the seemingly heavy thing floating on the seemingly light thing. I like that contrast with the scale with those, like having that cement kind of hanging over your head when you're looking at it. I think immediately makes you feel something. It might be fear, but at least you're feeling something. And then it comes down to like textures too, so the finishing of the different materials and the combos that you can do with that. And one thing that was really fun with the cement was the way I cast it in the different spots. Like some of it was cast touching sand, some of it was cast touching the ram board, and like I felt like I found a nice groove where I could transfer the energy onto the surface of these pieces with the materials I was using to cast them. And then I just love playing that way, so that's not going to stop anytime soon. I will really just enjoy throwing together things that are seemingly not supposed to be together, and that balance and contrast. Yes, ma'am. The beautiful girl in the front row. I love you too.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
For you too. On some of the pieces you've had to construct and weld a base of some sort to connect with it, and you're dealing with disparate materials. What's your thought process as far as, is it additive, and do you want it to be a noticeable element that supports it, or is it, what's your intent with it? You use it well, I'm just.
So like with the shelf pieces?
Yeah.
So like, I kind of saw those as relics pretty early on. I made those pieces about a year ago, and it was kind of a happy accident in the studio because we were making what we thought were going to be table bases for Amanda's store. And so we cast these forms, and that was the first time we were using the aircrete. And we didn't have any chicken wire, or we did have chicken wire, I didn't want to use it, but we had a ton of like mosquito screen, like porch screen. So I used the porch screen to help me a stronger fiber inside to hold it together. And then one of these things fell over, and when it fell over, it broke, and all the fiber was kind of holding it together, and I was just like, I just immediately saw like 6 sculptures laying there on the floor, and started cutting around and finding and peeling apart and kind of finding the pieces. So I really wanted to make mounts that worked individually with each piece, and so as I started playing with it, like for example, like the orange one, I think it's titled Before We Lose Our Minds, I wanted it to sit on one larger rod, and a lot of times I'm using scraps from the shop. So like a lot of the process with this show was like finding the objects in my studio that have been lying around for a while. Like a lot of the resin in the terrazzo was made years ago. It's just been sitting there. You know, it's weird, like I end up in my studio a lot, and a lot of my work's been commission-based lately, so a lot of the work that's left in there is just things that didn't necessarily work, or they were experiments. So I feel like I'm just surrounded by all my failures all the time. So it's, a lot of these things will sit there for a long time, and then one day you'll be in there playing and something sparks your eye with it, and you're like, oh, I need that piece, you know? And so a lot of those little shapes I had lying around, and I started just trying to piece them and fit them together so they create a little more interest and help with the gesture. And like the one-eyed Jack one, it was just like, it only sits that way with those shapes holding it that way. Like any other way, it's a totally different thing. And so it's just playing with materials and just kind of laying things out, setting them next to each other, and then letting them sit for a little bit. Like with those, I really step back from my urge to like dive in and rip things apart, because you lose a lot of pieces when you do it that way. And so with these, I took a little more time and care of like figuring out what exactly I wanted with each one. Daniel. Yari's our little artist. She's always making drawings.
So I love your small drawings, right? Your initial sketches or anything happen during the process. Can you describe how and why you cast them in resin? And maybe if those ones, I don't know if they are directly related to the final pieces, but if there's something about those that you did cast that's special.
Yeah, so that was a fun day. So I was making the resin for the terrazzo pieces. So I mixed all my own colors for the terrazzo. So I took white cement, mixed it with acrylic paint, and then you put it in a big, like gallon-sized Ziploc bag and let it dry. And then you just hammer it and it'll flake up and chunk up and stuff, and then you can mix it in. So I could make my color palette however I wanted. So I was pouring the resins for that, and I was just pouring it on plastic sheeting, so it'd be real thin and easy to break up. But I had these Tupperware lids laying around that I used to keep all the hardware we use for installing artwork in, and keep the lids on there so they don't get dirty. And so I had a little extra resin and flipped over this Tupperware lid, and these drawings, like I have this little drawing book, and I just kind of like, the thing I like to do at night is just doodle, and even my doodling is very intuitive. And so we decided, and Christina was like, yes, rip apart your drawing books. I wanted to have the drawing wall already, and then I had this little extra bit of resin, and I took like kind of the more finished drawings out of the sketchbook, and I just put one inside that resin and left the blue tape on it because it was just blue taped up to my studio wall, and that's how that happened. I just fell in love with it. I think they're super cool. They're fun.
They are quite magical because there's like a little light that beams out in the center of all of them. I don't know how you.
So the trick with that, well, after the first one, you'll see the first one is the one with all the bubbles, because I didn't torch it to get the bubbles out. So what happened is, when I submerged the drawing in the resin, I pushed one section a little closer, like a little farther, so it ends up a little closer to the front. So there's not as much of the color in resin in front of it. So it looks like it's lit from behind, and I just thought that was like the most magical little happy accident. But now I know I can do it, so I can manipulate it. So like after I did the other 4 or 5, I was able to kind of pick and choose the spot where I wanted to highlight a little bit. But those are kind of like dreams of pieces I want to make. Like I want some tabletop pieces that kind of have a geometric cement base with the steel coming out of, or vice versa. I want to make more modular, smaller sections that are a little more geometric. Kind of back to like the way I used to make my wood projects. Like I just love like sharp edges and repetition, making little geodes and kind of things. You know, I love faceted things, and I think I'd like to kind of go in that route with the work. So in some of those, you can see those shapes kind of layered, and I want to cast them in a way that I'll be able to kind of piece them together like Legos almost. So yeah, those are dreams of things to come. For sure.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned that some of the pieces are like relics, which is interesting. When I look at pieces, I get this drawn from artifacts. So like you mentioned, a lot of things that could have been pulled out of the ground, and the materials that you're working with obviously are things like the box in the ground, or those you mentioned like those outdoor works. So I guess my question is, with these outdoor works, are you looking to lean a little bit more into that, like essentially the futuristic is like the way that you work with metal screen futuristic with organic shape of the right screen pretty similar, you know what I mean? So those juxtapositions. I was wondering if you're looking for that.
I hope so. I mean, it seems like that's where I feel most comfortable, you know. So definitely going to keep pushing in that direction. It feels natural.
I just had a quick question about the little colored painted squares on some painting. Can you just address that?
I'd love to. Yeah. So with those, that started because in one of my other sketchbooks, I just like making little gouache paintings that are about the size of the screen. So I'll take pictures and then I'll just make the shape with my phone, and then I'll try and paint that scene. With these, when I started them, I thought I'd go kind of not hyper realistic, but more realistic, and so have a landscape painting on there. But it just didn't seem to work. It seemed a little cheesy with those pieces. So I kind of wanted to go in a different direction where it was almost same shape as a screen. I like that little square one, you know, it almost feels like you're looking at Instagram or something. And I wanted something that we're also comfortable staring at our screens all the time. So I thought maybe if I could put something there that is the same shape, people will be comfortable with it. And then just make it almost like white noise, you know, just that static on your TV. So it ended up just being these washes and these ombre things and just nothingness. So maybe you can be comfy staring at nothingness instead of your phone for a little bit. So that's kind of my inspo there. Yes.
As you go larger, you were doing a lot of laser cut work for a while, and the lacy installations and steel. And those clearly had a lot of negative space that was fun to play with. Are you thinking about the negative space of these larger pieces, and especially if they're outside, that shadow casting is just it's another dimension that it creates.
Yeah, definitely.
So is it a consideration as you're building, or is it kind of like a happy accident at this point?
No, even with my metal pieces, you know, they're all hand cut. And just doodling for hours with a plasma cutter. But finding the combo with the solid form with the negative space is, that's all we're all shooting for when we're making 3D objects. And with this, it's there were some happy accidents that happened, like the small one here on the left, Morning Mr. Magpie. I feel like that one, there were some moments while I was casting it, so I had to make some really quick decisions with the sand, and then as I was shaping that piece, and you know, that little nose that came off the bottom of it, like I had a blowout. You know, the cement blew out, and I had no idea that was going to be there. So that was a happy accident that ended up working out. You know, but it's what I ended up doing with those pieces is I made the shape that I wanted with rain board, which is like 4 protector board, and it's kind of thick cardboard, so I could make my gesture and kind of get my shape and general idea of what I wanted kind of on the metal stand, so I could see generally where I was going with it. And then, but when I put it in the sand, it was like all kinds of things. Change the shape and the cement once it starts pushing, and like trying to force it back into a spot where you want it to be. So yeah, a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak a little bit to how you titled these?
Oh yeah.
Like how did they, was it the beginning of the process, middle, end, and how did it come up with it?
Cool. So my professor in college, he kind of turned me on to naming everything after music. He named a lot of his stuff after Talking Head songs. He was at UGA when the B-52s were there, so he used to hang out at the Love Shack and paint live while they were playing music. And I always just love that. It is close with me. Music's a huge part of our life. So I kind of find like with these, like I made them, it was a moment, and like it was quite an explosion for me. So afterwards, when I was sitting there with them, it was a matter of like kind of assigning a feeling that I was having for each one. So each piece in there is named after a song or a lyric that just kind of resonated with me. I think Morning Mr. Magpie is probably my favorite. This is something I learned recently about magpies, but they're a type of bird, and apparently they're bad luck in like, Scottish folklore. So apparently the story goes that the magpie has a drop of the devil's blood under its tongue, and whenever one comes in front of you, they like stealing shiny objects, and they're super aggressive. They're like in the crow and the bird family, and they'll come in and steal stuff from you. So whenever you see one, you have to greet it with a nice thing. So you say, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie, how's your wife?" And so Radiohead did a song about this, and the song started because this magpie came into Tom York while he was eating lunch in the park and stole his stuff. And with that one, it was almost like so many lucky things happened in making that piece that it really spoke for me to the process of creating things where there's just some luck involved in my approach, and like I can plan all I want to, but things are gonna change on me, and just being able to kind of look that in the face and be like, I'm not worried about you, I'm gonna just keep moving forward. So yes. She asked when's the show going to be over. You kids are doing great.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Zach? All right, well, thank you all so much for coming. We're gonna wrap it up in about 15 minutes, but don't forget, all of Zach's work is for sale. So yes, thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Zach.